And if you do want an urgent comment or a question during after the presentations, please raise your hand and we will allow that. That's not a problem. And in the workshop that takes about 30 minutes, you have plenty of time also to raise your thoughts. So without much ado, Bent Sverre, I would like to give the word to you. So please, if you would like to share your presentation and start the session.
Thank you, Jenny. Very nice to see so much awake people in the morning here, just after Easter. It is also very impressive to see that we have 112 European cities that have joined the Net Zero Cities, the European initiative, with a goal of emission-free cities by 2030. That is a goal that addresses all the greenhouse gas emissions, but today we will set the spotlight on the transport sector. Quite a number of these 112 cities are found in the Nordic region, and quite a number of them is with us here today. So that's something we're very, very glad of. But if you're considering the time span, the goal of emission-free cities and emission-free traffic is extremely ambitious. And I think it's right to say that in many of these cities, there is a quite obvious lack of connection between the goal they have committed to and the measures that are enforced to reach that goal. We, with this webinar today, want to point to zero emission zones as a necessary part of the toolbox that will bring us to on the road to net zero, zero emission transport. And that's what I want to talk about today, and see if I can share my presentation with you. Together with a number of very smart people from Multiconsult, Halogen, Footprint, Nilu, and some others, I have been leading the development of a plan for introduction of low or zero emission zones in the 3 net zero cities in Norway: Oslo, Trondheim, and Stavanger. And what I want to do now is to share some of the key insights from this process with you. Here we naturally will focus on the big the strategic questions and not all the filthy details, but I can assure you that there is a lot of filthy details in this work as well. But we keep it on a certain level today. And emission-free transport sector, as we already been into, by 2030 is a demanding goal. But what we found in this the work with the zero emission zones for the Norwegian cities is that it is not impossible. It's not easy, but it's not impossible. It will require the use of many different instruments and measures to address the needs in the different parts of the transport sector if we are going to get rid of all polluting vehicles in quite a few years. That's what we're talking about is, of course, the improvement of public transport and stimulating of zero emission technology, as well as cycling and walking. We also talk about disruption of city logistics in a certain scale, and all of this will, of course, contribute very much to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But it is still impossible to get to net zero in the transport sector without adapting measures that explicitly prohibit fossil vehicles. What we see is Zero emission zones are a necessary part of any city's plan for emission-free traffic. And I want to go through some of the main points that must be resolved before introducing such zone in a city. Before we go to that, I will just emphasize that we have a complicating factor that also must be taken into consideration when constructing the climate policy, because the climate goal is not the sole target for urban transport planning. We also need to reduce the car use in general, and especially when traveling to city centers. This means that simply substituting fossil cars with electric cars isn't sufficient to reach the transport goals. So we have to have a perspective in the climate policy that also takes into account the need for reducing car use. Okay. Let's start with what we have as the basic problem in all politics, and that is the problem that the popular measures don't always work as we want them to, and that the effective measures almost always are unpopular. So we have a set of conflicting goals there. Oops. It was very difficult to do this. Sorry. Yeah. Politics is about balancing effect and public support. You can say that a zero emission zone means prohibition of fossil cars and fossil vehicles in the zone. And this is, of course, a very effective way of reaching the climate goals because you prohibit the vehicles that emit climate gases. But it's also the most unpopular way to do it. What you do when you enforce a zero emission zone is that you tell people that they are not allowed to take their cars to their home or to their workplace or to the place that they do their shopping. And not surprisingly, many people won't think that this is a good idea. And normally you would have the opportunity to use time as a way to come through this conflict of interest. But here we are halfway nearly in 2023, and 2030 basically it's tomorrow. It's very short time, and that means you can't use time to overcome this conflict between effect and accept in the public, and to overcome this problem and to limit the conflict, you have to do at least two things, or that's what we found out in the work we have done. First thing is to start the work immediately. It takes quite much time to get these things, these kind of measures in effect. You have to have this a political process, and it's a process with the technology, and it's a process of a lot of things, among them the work to get the inhabitants and the users of the city to accept the measure. So you have to start. You have very little time. You have to start immediately. The other thing you have to do is to be smart, and that's of course obvious to all of you, but I state it anyway. What you need to do is to find solutions that reduces the number of fossil vehicles quickly, but you have to do it in a way that isn't bothering people more than necessary. So you have to seek for solutions that give effect, but with as small problems for the public as possible. And the public here is both the persons living in and using the city, but also the companies that we find in the city. What we recommend is to use a test-based introduction strategy. You should be, of course, very explicit about the long-term goal of a fossil-free transport sector by 2030, which isn't very long time. But you and you will also need to be clear that this is a target that will be enforced. You will, when you get to 2030, people and companies will have to find solutions. But then you start now with the easiest part of this transition, which also sort of finding the lowest part of this fence to climb over. And that way you give everyone a belief that net zero transport is feasible without too big problems. And at the same time, you have to start with the most difficult parts, also the part that is really hard the part of the transport sector which have really big problems with getting to a zero emission by 2030, because there you really need the time to find the solutions. When you start working with those difficult parts, you should do it in a quite gentle way. Be very concerned about showing those affected, those who are going to do the toughest job in this process, that the city, the society are concerned about finding solutions that works for them. It's obviously not a target to wipe out the transport sector altogether. We need the transport sector, and we will need the transport sector even in the zero emission future. But we have to work with them now so that they take these problems seriously and start working now to find the solutions that gets us to zero emission by 2030. And then, and this means, for instance, that you don't start this process by enforcing a big prohibition zone, which in a big part of the city. You start in a small part of the city, and probably just with one group of traffic of the vehicles, either persons or the commercial traffic or some part of that. And you seek for the ones that wants to take part in the solutions. You work with mitigating measures that makes the process easier for those affected. And when you think you have a solution, you start to test it in this small part for this small number of persons or companies. And you evaluate what you do, you find the solutions, you see what is needed to adjust, and then you evaluate once again, and you repeat that process until you have a solution that you think that this is possible to scale from. And when you find those solutions that you think will work, you start scaling that to the rest of the city. And that process you will do for all the parts of the city and all the groups of vehicles. And of course, this process could be a topic for its own seminar, but we will leave it with this for now. So we go on to enforcement here. Enforcement. How do you make the vehicle owners, the vehicle users, to accept the zero emission zone? And this is sort of, once you have decided to go down the path of to emission zones, you must take a decision on how you enforce it. It's two main ways. It's the geofencing using satellite-based technology, or you can use the ANPR technology. They use the AutoPass chip to detect vehicles. And you can see geofencing, two main advantages. It doesn't need any infrastructure along the road, which makes it easy to change the zones. It makes it quite cheap to enforce. And all new vehicles have the technology needed. Unfortunately, quite a number of existing vehicles doesn't have this technology, and that's a problem that have to be sorted out if you're going to use geofencing. Victoria will tell us a bit more about that part later on in the webinar. On the other hand, the main advantage of the Autopass technology is that many cities, at least in Norway, have a payment system for cars using the ANPR system already. And then you can use the same equipment to enforce the zero emission zone, which of course is a very big advantage if you have that system in work already. Problem is it's difficult and expensive to make changes in the zone, and of course it's a prerequisite that every vehicle has that Autopass chip to use that system. Whichever of these two systems you choose, you must in addition have a camera-based system to sort of get the vehicles without the necessary technology in the vehicles. Victoria will, as I said, come back to this system more in detail. Next topic is the goods delivery or city logistics. Zero emissions transport will, of course, also include the commercial traffic. And while the electrification of passenger cars have come a long way, especially in Norway, but also starting up in the rest of the Nordic countries, vans and trucks are lagging. We also say that there is in addition to the climate reduction, you have a potential for substantially reducing traffic by higher effectiveness in the goods delivery. In the recent counting of goods delivery in a shopping mall in Trondheim with quite a number of shops, they found that 80% of the vehicles coming with deliveries to that shopping mall had deliveries for one shop alone, and often just one delivery, one box or one delivery, which shows the potential of effectiveness by better coordination of the city logistics. Emission zones should be a way to change the way goods delivery in our cities take place. Coordination is an obvious part of that. There is also possibilities to regulate how deliveries to residential homes are done. Can give incentives to use boxes placed in central part of a residential area instead of all the way to the door of the home. That way reduce traffic in the residential areas, which is increasing quite sharp due to increased internet shopping. And it's also possible to use the zero emission zones to work against quite lousy conditions for the drivers. So it's a lot of opportunities of using the emission zones to make the city logistics work better than it does today. And that's also a very interesting and part of it, which city of Trondheim especially have worked a lot with. Then the effect is also, of course, a very important part of what we're trying to achieve with the zero emission zones. And that is, in fact, quite easy because if you introduce a proper zero emission zone with functioning enforcement, you will reach the goal of zero emission in the transport sector, because you prohibit it. It's not allowed to drive into this zone with a fossil vehicle. But of course, you can start with the smoother measures like low emission zones where it costs money to go in, and then you will have not full effect of these zones. So it's of course interesting also to look into the effects of these kind of zones. But as we started out with, you want other measures than the zone to do most of the work to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, because you want to reduce the conflict potential. So if you follow the recipe we draw up, you will start by, if you, there you start the theory of the diffusion of innovation. Some of you have seen that before, I think. Which sort of shares the population in what kind of how easy they adapt to new technologies, new products. And what you want to do in the work with the zero emission zones is sort of making other measures meet the needs of your innovators. You find your innovators, you find how you make them do the transition to zero emission vehicles. Then you carry on with the early adapters and so on. And the aim here is that you in 2030 are left with a little group of laggards who are sort of clinging to their fossil cars, and that little group is the ones that is sort of pushed over the edge by the zero emission zone. So that's mainly what we want to do, and then you can see that the effect of the zero emission zone by itself wouldn't be very high, but it's the zero emission zone that is sort of is sort of flying over the use of the other measures, and that make the inhabitants and the companies to start the adaptation as early as they can. And because they know that in 2030 it's coming and we have to be in place. So that's what we think. What do we think is the most difficult part of this process? What is the things that it's difficult to solve for us in the process of starting these zero emission zones? That's I think the starting point of that discussion is that you have to understand that you need to make democratically elected politicians vote for means that is quite tough, but necessary to reach these very ambitious goals. In other words, that means that you must make quite many of the inhabitants of your city want this transition, or at least accept it. And that's something we have been working a lot with in this process, the Norwegian cities. How do we organize a process which make this possible, taking into account that people tend to get quite engaged in discussions about how their mobility is regulated from the society side. We think this requires a holistic approach that emphasizes those affected, and that we have a number of problems that need to be solved. One of them, which Heidi from Oslo will talk more about in just a few moments, is the transition to electric cars in areas where people do not have their own parking with charging facilities. Another one is the problem that electric cars tend to be driven more than fossil vehicles because they are cheaper to use and because they are sort of giving you another kind of feeling driving with your beautiful electrical vehicle instead of using a fossil vehicle emitting a lot of black smoke behind it. We also have the legal legal problems. In Norway, we still doesn't have the national the national law in place to enforce this in a city level. I think you have it in Sweden. I'm not sure what the status is in the other Nordic countries. We have the social questions. How do we ensure that everyone involved in the is involved and able to do the transition to zero emissions? And you also have the, of course, mobility solutions that work, that give most people alternatives to private cars as often as possible. To help us sort these questions out, we have gathered some of the smartest women in the transport sector in the Nordic countries and from cities all over the Nordic. So then I think I will stop talking now and give the floor back to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Bent Sverre. Very interesting and very good. And I'd just like to remind you all that if you have questions regarding presentations or in general comments, please use the chat. We're quite used to use the chat and also have a feedback session there. It's a quite good tool. It won't be shown in the recording. I would like to give the word to Heidi Sørensen now from Oslo City. She's the climate director, and I would like to give the floor to you. Welcome, and please share your presentation if you have a presentation. Thank you so much.
There is a presentation, and you probably hear me as well.
We do that very well.
There's so long since COVID now that I was forgot to unmute. Just let me start to say thank you. I will talk about how Oslo is working to be a zero emission city in the mobility area. We of course want to be a zero emission city in overall, but today I will talk about the mobility area and the zero emission zone and some of the measures that we have done and are planning to do to become a zero emission by 2030, because that is our goal. I thought I should start with, let's see if my computer is responding. Not. I don't know what's happening. Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Then it's not my total. There, I just have to push the button very hard. Start by taking you back to 1989. That was the year when I moved to Oslo, and this was how downtown looked. Nothing green to see at all, and very much built to serve the car. This is how the same area look today, and as a fact, the climate measures in Oslo has given the city a cleaner air, less noise, safer and more human-oriented streets. Some measures were controversial when first introduced, and the measures we are talking about today is definitely among them. But now a majority of the people in Oslo thinks that the climate measures are giving us a better city, and that includes those who are not that concerned about climate change. I think the climate debate for too long has been about sacrifice. I think that we should turn that around and say that actually climate measures, and especially in the mobility area, creates better cities and better quality of life for everyone. Just have that as a background. The last years, the city's air quality has significantly improved, and the reasons are reduced traffic, but also a dramatic rise in the proportion of electric cars and buses. And sometimes I think technology development exceed our expectation. The numbers I will give you now is the newest one, but few would have forecast them 10 years ago. Today, 81% of new passenger cars sold in Oslo so far in 23 is electric, and 48% of new vans. And I think even better, 30% of new heavy vehicles have so far in 2023 been zero emission or biogas. So even though decided that vans and heavy vehicles is lacking behind, they definitely are coming. I thought I should dive a little bit deeper into these numbers, and that the changes happening now so fast is very important for us, because mobility represents 50% of the climate emissions in Oslo. This is the heavy vehicles. As you can see, biogas and electric vehicles are still small, but they are coming, and don't underestimate them. And there are new models out on the market almost every month. And Oslo has taken on board a lot of measures to make it interesting to use heavy vehicles that are zero emission of biogas. And you can see the differences between Norway as a whole and Oslo. And actually, when you look at that numbers, you know, Oslo is included in Norway as a whole. And if we exclude Oslo from the Norway part there will be few. So far, this introduction, Oslo is piloting the introduction of heavy vehicles in Norway. Vans are doing better. 52% of new vans in Oslo and 37% of new vans in Norway. We had discussions about, we thought the introduction went a little bit slow last year, but that was probably the reason for that was that there were a lot of new models that were not brought to the market yet, but in January a lot of new models were launched, and they were European, not Chinese, and become very popular. And every electricians in Oslo now need to have an electric car, of course. So still, if the sales is high, it's 13% of the fleet of vans in Oslo that are electric, but rising. And they definitely need to rise more if you are going to achieve our goals, that we should have vehicles sold that are not electric by 2025. That is also national. Local measure has been important for electric vans. There have been dedicated parking for electric vans in the city centers, support schemes for charging infrastructure, especially for vans, and they pass freely in the tolling. That is, of course, important. And here, procurement has played an important role. Everything that the municipality buys should be delivered by zero emission transportation. This still is and has been a gradual process, but now we have in force a rule that say if 3 providers can offer this, zero emission becomes the minimum criteria in the procurement. Never underestimate how much you can change by using procurements. If you are a demanding customer, you can have things changed very fast. And of course, we have been talking about, I will come back to the zero emission zone, but we have been talking about it and we have been discussing it for years. And I think, in my view, even only the discussion about it has helped, because people have invested thinking that we of course want to have a car that we can use in the city center. And electric vans can use the bus lane. That is also a very attractive thing and a very attractive local measure that helps the transition. But we need the measures. If the measures we have put in force were taken away, there will be difficult for an electric van to compete with a diesel van, and then the cost will be too high. When it comes to personal EVs, we are now up to 34% of the fleet. Sometimes when we talk, and we have since more than 80% of the new sale of electrical vehicles are electric, we thought, oh, we are done with this problem. That is not true. It's only 1/3 of the car fleet yet that is electric, and it should be 100% by 2030. So we still have a way to go here as well. There is a wide range of policies that has led to this, but I don't think you should underestimate the toll ring. And we finance infrastructure for public transport, cycling and walking by these road tolls. Electric vehicles pay lower taxes in toll ring than fossil vehicles. And that is a very important measure for us to transition away from fossil fuels. And also the investment in charging infrastructure has been important, as also here public procurement. See, the zero emission zone, as you can see in the picture, are planned to be in the very center of Oslo. The zero emission zone is, I think, been discussed and is seen as very controversial because it prohibits fossil cars inside the city center. And there are, of course, people living there. Then when you come to passenger car, then can't use their own cars in their own neighborhood. So that also, of course, in a way, is very controversial. Our proposal has been to, and what is now being debated at the political level, is that vans and heavy vehicles go first. That it might be counterintuitive, since it is the passenger cars who has come, the development has come longer. But we think that the passenger cars will be more controversial than actually prohibiting vans and heavy vehicles going into the city center. And it is on those two we definitely need more measure to ensure the transition. And if we do that inside the city center, it will also have effects outside. It's not only in the city center that you will see the effect on the climate, because that will be a very strong incentive to invest in zero emission heavy duty vehicles that of course also will be used outside of the city center. So a zero emission zone, as we see it, is a measure not only with a value inside that zone, but will have great value outside as well. Actually, when we looked at the climate measures, the climate reduction that we can have out of such a zone, they were higher outside of the zone in total than actually inside. So this is a very important measure to shift toward vans and heavy vehicles. And now we have this debate going. We don't have the legal right to do it at the national level, so quarreling both with national and have strong debate on the local level. So it will be an interesting things to see if we are able to enforce the zero emission zone in Oslo. We are also working on electric shared mobility, and that is for people that are living in the city center important, because they often don't have their own garage, many of them, and they don't have a place to put their car, and we don't want many cars in the city. So, but some people will need cars every now and then, and electric shared mobility is a good way to move forward. The municipality are giving parking lots and other incentives to companies that provide shared mobility. But I think the most important things we do at the moment is how we manage our own fleet of car, and how we can put the cars that are on the day used as by the municipality in the afternoons can be part of a shared mobility project. We have seen that our initial work has seen that we can reduce the amount of cars a lot, and we can also see that many of the cars owned by the municipality itself is not used very much. They don't drive much, so there are space there that could be either then we don't need that many. Do we need many? We should put them out in the market so we can be able to share them. So personally, I am a walker. I don't own a car. I use shared mobility every now and then, but I'd like to finish by saying that Oslo is actually a city for walkers. We are known for the electric mobility, but our last national survey shows that 30% of all daily trips in Oslo is done by walking. And that is despite our long and cold winters. We are actually a city for walkers. So I think to have the big picture, we also have the zero emission public transportation sector that we are very proud of. The last buses are arrived at the countries now, so by 2023, all public transport will be zero emission. So becoming a zero emission city on the mobility sector is definitely possible, but you need to be willing to use all the measures you can think of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heidi, for that encouraging words that it is possible to become a net zero city, but we still have some things to do. But it's also impressive to hear about the 30% of a walking city. I like that. Very nice. If you have questions to Heidi, please use the chat, or if there's an immediate question or a remark, please raise your hand. That's also possible. We will move on. We will also share the presentations in PDFs afterwards, together with the recording. I think I forgot to mention that in the beginning. Anyway, I would like to give the word to City of Stockholm, to Victoria Haslöf. Please, and welcome for this webinar, Victoria.
Thank you guys so much, and thank you for some great presentations so far. I was in Trysil just this weekend, and there was a lot of electric vehicles there, but maybe it was all people from Oslo. Who knows? But yes, let me see if I could just, there we go. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about a way you can achieve zero emission zones, I guess, or a tool to get there, I would like to say. But first, my name is Victoria Haslöf. I work as a strategist for the City of Stockholm, the Transport Department. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about some lessons learned from a project called Smart Urban Traffic Zones that we've been working on. Here we go. And first, sort of to set the scope, The reasoning behind us testing and working with geofencing is, of course, to find a solution for the sustainable growth of our cities. As our cities grow, the competition for land use intensifies and compromises have to be made. It's not only a place for walking and bicyclists and cars, we also have to fit in all these new systems and functions into our public space. But as long as we want livable cities with a lot of different functions to support what our inhabitants needs and wants, we are reliant on trucks and traffic to deliver goods into our cities. So therefore, it becomes a question of how do we do so in a safe and sustainable way. And from Stockholm, we have seen that our streets have to be dynamic and adaptable to different kinds of needs throughout the day. But as we all know as well, the transport sector plays a crucial part in a sustainable society, and many Swedish cities have set high goals on becoming climate neutral by 2030. And as some of you may know, Stockholm has actually planned to implement an environmental zone or a zero emission zone by the end of next year. So we are on this matter. But in order to achieve these goals and at the same time find a dynamic way to regulate our streets, we find that geofencing might present a solution. And I will just show you quickly, we have during the last couple of years, there has been several studies on this matter and demonstrations and pilots carried out throughout all of Sweden. And one of them is being this project Smart Urban Traffic Zones, which I will now dive a little deeper into. Here we go. So yeah, the project was aimed to contribute to a more flexible city where a vehicle moves on people's terms. And the project started in 2020 and we finished up in September 2022, so quite a while ago now. But the main focus was to demonstrate 3 different concepts or pilots, and 2 of them were done in Stockholm and 1 in Göteborg. And I will now tell you a little bit more about what we did in each of these demonstrations. So the first one was called Innovation Zone Hornsgatan, and it took place around an intersection in the central part of Stockholm, where with a geofence area spanning over a few blocks connected to the street Hornsgatan. And this is a busy area with a lot of people moving. There's schools, pedestrians, and a lot of restaurants, etc. And the demonstration here was aimed at speed adaptation of delivery vehicles depending on the amount of pedestrians in the area. So we had smart sensors installed to measure the number of pedestrians, and when the number of detected pedestrians reached a predefined limit, a speed reduction was communicated via geofencing solution to the vehicles to lower their speed from 30 kilometers an hour to 20 kilometers an hour. So this means that the vehicle would not be able to accelerate above this lower, now lower speed limit. And in this demonstration, we had 6 vehicles that participated. And we had this one running for about 4 months, and we had great positive experiences for all the involved partners, including the drivers. We did, however, have an unexpectedly large number of vehicles that kept a higher speed than what was communicated through geofence, and we do believe that that was caused by the geofencing zone was rather small, so they didn't have sufficient time to actually slow down the car. But the data analysis still showed that the main speed of participating vehicles was lowered during the pilot, and also the integration of the data input between the sensors and the vehicles was successful. So overall, it was good. The second demonstration that also took part in Stockholm was called Digitally Issued Exemptions for Construction Transports. Very nice and short term. And this pilot was aimed at increasing the load efficiency for heavy mass transports through speed limitations. So the demonstration took also place in the same parts of Stockholm as the first one, with the geofencing then expanding over a whole island in the middle of the city. And the pilot included 1 heavy mass transport vehicles that delivered concrete to construction sites in the area. And so under normal circumstances, this vehicle is not allowed to load to its full capacity due to limitations of the bearing structure of the road. So in other words, the vehicle would be too heavy. So the pilot then depended on us, the city, to issue exemptions for the vehicle to be able to carry a heavier load than normal. So we demonstrated a geofencing solution that reduced the speed of the vehicle if it was too heavy. So from 30 kilometers an hour to 15 kilometers an hour when entering the geofenced area. So the main idea was that the lower speed would compensate for the heavier load of the vehicle by reducing the vibrations created by the vehicle, and thereby it would not have a negative impact on the road infrastructure. And this demonstration was also generally a success, even though we struggled with quite significant delays due to the pandemic. The vehicle involved had to be equipped with a sign for a slow-moving vehicle, and we had some technical updates that had to be made, and it was slowed down by us not being able to get together and talk about it in a fast way and actually see the vehicle. But in the end, it turned out good. But it was also successful in the way that we managed to reduce the speed of the vehicle, and we also did an evaluation where we measured the vibration transmitted through the area surrounding the vehicle, and we managed to keep it under the what is allowed, and we could show that the vibrations was not harmful in any way. But the main issue with the scale up for this demonstration is that we still have some regulations to overcome, and to increase the load capacity in a general term. We can't work with exemptions from the city's part. We have to have a legal framework that actually would support such a system. And so for the final demonstration, this one took place in Göteborg. It was aimed to increase the safety for vulnerable road users at construction site exits. So this demonstration was carried out in an industrial area with many heavy vehicles moving around. And here we wanted to create a smart zone to increase safety and reduce the collision risks between transports and vulnerable road users. In this case, it was bicyclists. So this was achieved by using a connected sensor, as well as in the first demonstration. So they detected the vehicle and the cyclist passing by the construction site exits, and then a warning system connected to a digital message sign was notifying the cyclist to pay extra attention when they approached the construction site exit. So you can see the setup sort of in the picture here. And this pilot was carried out in 3 stages of the live demonstration in Göteborg. So the first stage was to test the technical solution that integrated the input from the smart sensors detecting both the vehicle and cyclist, and the variable message sign we used to convey the warning messages. And the second stage of the test was aimed at evaluating the behavior and experiences of cyclists when interacting with the solution. And the last stage of the demonstration was aimed at examine the behavior and experience of the drivers of the transportation vehicles. So basically we tested the technical setup, but we also wanted to capture the behavior of both cyclists and drivers. And they were also both interviewed about their experiences. And you could say that the perceived safety, I would say, increased significantly when the smart warning system was in place, and particularly in the situation where the vehicle was entering the construction site by means of a right-hand turn, so they would actually intersect the path of the cyclist. But the most common feedback we got from cyclists and drivers regarding improvements was related to the design of the system, like the placement of the warning sign, as well as what the message was saying. So obviously it was crucial that the cyclists and drivers easily could understand the message that they were reading, but also what action they were expected to do or to be carried out when reading the sign. And here we noted that the existing guidelines on how to use a VMS sign are not really adapted to cyclists. So there's definitely have to be some development of that integration before this can be scaled up. But just to then conclude the project overall, would say that it was a success basically because we were so many different actors and had very different input. But it was mainly what was a real success factor, that we could help out each other, and we had very different perspectives on all the matters. And we are currently starting up the next stage of this project with new test beds and new pilots to further develop and study the implementation of geofencing and how it can contribute to a more dynamic and sustainable urban environment. So with that said, I would just like to thank you for listening, and please ask questions or get in touch if you like to. And I've also attached the link to our webpage for the project if you want to do some more deep diving into this matter. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Very interesting. Can I just ask you a question? How do you share, you mentioned Stockholm and Gothenburg, but do you share with the other cities about the geofencing part? Because I know there's been studies also done in Oslo about it. And how do you share that kind of, so that it could be applied in other cities as well in Sweden?
We actually have a national incentive that the transport, what we call them, the Transport Agency of Sweden, have a geofencing initiative that that many cities are part of. So we're trying to spread the results from like these kinds of tests through that network. But we have been trying to come to events like this and just spread the message of what we're doing through our different networks, basically.
That would be very interesting also to share the kind of results also from other cities in the Nordic region. I think this is very needed. Thank you so much, Victoria, for your presentation. And also, as I said, we will share all the presentations afterwards. And if you still have questions to Victoria, please ask them in the chat. She will be joining us throughout the whole webinar as well. Then we move on to Denmark and city of Copenhagen to Annette. Annette Kaiser, please welcome also to you, and the floor is yours, so please share the presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope it works.
We had a test round.
We had a test, but it's not the same.
No, it's not the same.
Okay.
Yes, we can see your slides.
Okay, and just one slide.
Just one slide, correct.
But thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Annette Kaiser. I work in the city of Copenhagen in our mobility department. And I think I will start to say thank you to the other people presenting. It's very, very interesting. And it also confirms what I have been working with for many, many years, that you need to do a lot of things to solve the mobility and transport in the cities. And now we've heard some aspects, and I will try to give mine. I am project manager for green mobility, and I've been working in Copenhagen for more than 20 years. So I could talk really a lot about a lot of solutions. It's been difficult to give my take on this, but I have chosen to focus on two sort of aspects, jumping from the high level to a very concrete level. And I'm not going to talk so much about zero emission zones. We also think about that, or electrical vehicles, or smart solutions. But I'm going to talk about the planning system we work with, because I have learned from other corporations that it is interesting how to make things happen, and that you need a quite holistic approach to the planning system. And then I will jump to some very specific measures or initiatives that we're working with in Copenhagen. So I hope I can work my way through this. But first, just a little bit about Copenhagen, a map from our municipal plan. It doesn't say much, except if you're a Copenhagener, but it's just to show you that Copenhagen is a quite small city. It is not all in all, but the municipality of Copenhagen does not cover a very wide area. But it's quite dense, and we don't have very big distances. We are also a city growing each year, and has been for the last 15 years. So the matter of space is also a problem in Copenhagen. We also have really a lot of workplaces. This is both good and bad. It's good because a lot of Copenhageners work in the city, but it also gives a lot of commuting. And then we don't have, or we have many cars, but maybe not as many as other cities have. Now for the planning system, it might be the same as you see everywhere in other cities in the Nordic countries, but I still would like to introduce it or to explain how important it is to make things happen. So we in Denmark, we have all municipalities have to have this municipal plan for how to develop the city. But when it then comes to how to make it happen, it's for mobility, but also the climate initiatives and everything else in Copenhagen, we have what we call a more vision-based way to work. So we have some general visions. Where do we want to bring Copenhagen in the future? And these are the political ideas for what should we do. And underneath these, we have some, we then follow up with some strategies and more concrete action plans. And all these plans support each other to reach the vision. And then they are developed with a lot of initiatives. And then comes in the difficult part to get the funding for going through with the initiatives. When the funding is there, of course, implement them, and I will show you some few examples on that. And then we have a system for following up all the time. We make yearly mobility accounts and bicycle accounts and city life accounts, so we can give a feedback both to the politicians regarding the visions and, of course, to the strategies. What should we do to change, or are we in the right direction? And when I then go to the system of plans, then this is our municipal plan. I'm sorry for the Danish text. I hope you, as Nordic partners, understand. It's the World City with Responsibility. We're right now developing a new one with more focus on climate than this one had. And then I've just picked one, our most general goal from the municipal plan, which is to say that maximum 25% of the trips in the city should be by car. And I have taken not the newest because it's not official yet, but the last official numbers that we have. And they are quite affected by the pandemic, as you probably can see and maybe have seen in other countries, because the number of walking trips has increased very much during the corona period. But the important thing is to take a look at the car, which is actually going down and down during the last decade. So that is just to say that it's important with clear goals and to follow up on the goals. We are not there yet, but that's the idea. Then the most important plans for our mobility issues are these three plans. The Green Mobility Plan, I will talk a little bit more about what's in it, but not that much. And then the Climate Neutral Plan, which is a very important plan in Copenhagen, since we, more than 10 years ago, decided to become CO2 neutral in 2025. It also goes for mobility, and it's not that easy. And the last one I want to mention is our cycling strategy, of course, because this is our absolute main point, where we have a vision saying we want to be the world's best cycling city. So these are the main important plans, and they work closely together, and they are also followed up by a number of action plans. Now I have a problem. Yeah. Okay, so just to say that the vision is very broad and just sort of introducing some buzzwords, but it still gives a what do you call it, a grab on which direction do we want to go in. And they're not very surprisingly, we want efficient and green mobility, but we also wanted to support the economic growth and to become CO2 neutral in 2025. And this is, of course, all to get a very livable city, which is a key issue in Copenhagen as well. Then the action plan on green mobility is, I think, internationally people call it a SUMP. Before this, we had more traffic-oriented plans talking about what do we do for the cars, what do we do for the public transport, etc. But in this plan, we start the other way around and say, okay, the themes are important. We start with the urban planning, We want a dense and a city where you have short distances. Today, this is more and more named like some 15-minute city or 5-minute city or whatever you call it, but we just named it like dense and a city with proximity. This is urban planning. Then the next step is to look at the green modes of transport, so to improve cycling, pedestrian, and public transport. And then the next step is to look at the road system and what we can do on that. And then we also have some other themes about, well, you could call the fourth one mobility management, but that is how to achieve changes in people's mobility habits. And the last one is to think out of the box, to use innovation. Then just to mention that, of course, the climate plan here is also very important, and it has given a strong push also on the mobility side, especially when it comes to electric mobility. And we have had a big focus on the shift for the buses, which we reached to become electrical, all of the buses, I think, in 2026. So we are a little bit behind Oslo here. But we also look a lot on what can we do as a municipality. So our own vehicles have been shifted to electrical vehicles, and we also look at the fleet management and how to do the municipal procurement. I think that was what I wanted to say about the planning, because I also really would like to show a few measures or initiatives. We have a huge number of things we do, like the other cities have. But I will just show a few things about cycling, and then what we call high streets, which might be something special for Copenhagen, and just then a last one about our medieval city, because that's quite new. When it comes to cycling and cycling infrastructure, it's quite a long-term thing to continuously build out the cycling infrastructure. And I just picked some pictures because it can be bicycle lanes, it can be separate lanes, it can be that you can bike against the one-way direction. So it can be big and small things. And then I also took just the newest update from our bicycle account on what did we do last year, sort of new bike lanes, bike initiatives. And when you look at it, you can see a big orange line looking like a network. And that's because we also work with regional cycling, and we call it super cycle highways. And these were opened, well, I think last year again in Copenhagen, but it is also a big cooperation together with all the municipalities in the region, so that people also can use the regional cycling system. This, oh yes, and then we also have some very big projects like building bridges for only cyclists and pedestrians. That's important in Copenhagen. It might be other places as well because of the water, but one of the bridges is also crossing a very big road, so you can do that separately. But this is, of course, very expensive, but also very popular and significant projects that people like really much. And then I actually wanted to show this to the connection with the super cycle highways is that you can also, if you don't want to bike both ways, or you suddenly it's raining or whatever, you can bring your bike on trains, on the regional trains and S trains. It's for free. On the metro, you have to pay. And then the taxis also are obliged to have the possibility to bring your bike. So you can be a bicyclist and you can then do something else if it's necessary. So I think this is also an important story for the bicycles, to expand the network, also to have the prestige projects, and then to be multimodal is important for bicyclists. The next example I want to mention is that we work with, we call them high streets, and it's a little bit difficult to translate because we have a special word in Danish called strøggade. And it's a place where there's a high activity, lots of shops, lots of people transporting them, lots of people living there, lots of things happening, and there are often very many conflicts. So some years ago, we decided that they need a special design, and maybe the map became too small, but the map of Copenhagen, there are some orange lines. These are the strøgader or high streets that we want to change. This is expensive project, so it's coming gradually. But the first one we did was called Nørrebrogade, which was quite full of many cars and very little space for the cyclists and the pedestrians. Lots of buses. We have the most used bus line in Copenhagen running through this street. And it was then changed so you could no longer drive with your car through all the street. You can use it, but only for small distances. Then you have to turn away again. And then with more space for the buses and the cyclists and the pedestrians. And it was quite effective. We evaluated it some years after. And one important thing is that it did, of course, reduce car traffic in the street, but it also reduced car traffic all in the area called Nørrebro, where it was located. So when you downsize for cars, some traffic simply disappears. People do something else. It's not new knowledge, but sometimes we don't have much documentation for this knowledge. So just to tell that, yes, people might think then cars will just go to other areas when you change the street, but no, some of the car traffic just doesn't happen. People do something else, walk or cycle or take the bus, or well, stay at home. And one thing we talk a lot about in Copenhagen, I wanted to illustrate with this, is because also this high street, there's a bridge, and the idea is to show that if you don't have so many cars, you have a lot of more space for other modes of transport, and you can get a lot of more people going through a street. So this shows that the growth in number of people cycling and walking gave much more, what do you call it, accessibility, or you could get more people going through the streets than by having a lot of space for the cars. Okay, I'll try to reach a little bit about the last example, which is quite new. This is our medieval city, which is a rather small but very historical area in the center of the city. It's only 1 square kilometer, but there's quite a lot of inhabitants and a really lot of workplaces. 50,000 people work in here, so come and go every day. Luckily enough, we also have a lot of public transport close to the area and in the area, and there's a lot of parking garages close to the area. So we have been talking for many years about what to do with this area, because there are also a lot of vehicles. Should we do something about it? And it has been a really long process. It's a story in itself, but it ended up some years ago in process where we want to do some experiments and have involved a lot of citizens to ask what should we do, and the experiments were then made to get in a dialogue with people using the urban space. It's a bit difficult in here because it's not only the inhabitants, it's a lot of people using the area, and we wanted to test of some things. And this was all to give some recommendations to a plan for the area. So we introduced 5 tests, all of them focused on how to improve conditions for cycling and walking, but then with some small differences in the concept. I think I forgot to mention the idea is to reduce the number of parking spaces on street in this area, and this way to do something else. And this is what we needed to get some input for. So one of the streets could look like, or did look like this before. So there's a lot of parking and, well, a classical inner street here in Copenhagen. And then we made an experiment and changed it to have more green, to have places to sit, and sort of marked that you can walk and bike on the road lane. So what we learned from these tests, except that people were really happy about the thought about testing first and then adapting it, like how to talk about it, and then what did we learn, what could we do. That was a very good way to do things. But it was also a success because people used the street to walk, and you could sit and you could enjoy the areas. And it was a bit of a surprise that the green elements were extremely popular. And this is not a green area, so it was a surprise. But I think we will go on working with that. For us, bicycle parking is always a challenge, and even more in this area. And then we have some problems with the noise from the city life in here. And the last thing we learned was we have to be careful about the delivery services because they're necessary in this area. So right now we have made a plan to take a look at what should we do in all of the area. And the idea is to create a better balance in the life in here. So not that many cars, but also more space to just sit and more green areas. We need more space for the pedestrians and the cyclists. We want to make the historical places more visible, to experience them in another way. And then, of course, the green aspect. And one last slide to show what the idea of the plan then is. And that is to the squares in the area, they should be freed more or less for, of course, car parking, but they are more or less already, but also for bicycle parking. They're full of bicycle parking today. That should be moved to the streets where we remove the car parking instead. And then there should be this more space to walking and cycling in the area. So it hopefully becomes livable, but also a live area. I think that was all I reached. I know it was a little bit in all directions, but that I think maybe it added some aspects to the electrification and the ITS and other aspects from the other cities.
Thank you so much, Annette. That was really inspiring. And even though you say it was all over and I think that's what we need. We need to hear about the test and the results you have done. And I think it's quite interesting because you are actually claiming back land, an area, space in cities for people. For both walking and cycling. And that is something that a lot of cities and countries are today struggling with because we are over-investing in infrastructure. As we're dimensioning for peak traffic, and people are over-investing in cars that we all know that remains parked for about the 95% of most of the times. So what you're doing actually showcasing and reclaiming back land, reducing emissions by these tests. So it will be really interesting to see more about the documentation because I think there are good examples here to share with the rest of the Nordic. I hope you all find as well that this was very inspiring as well. So please, if you have questions to Annette, please ask them also in the chat. Last but not least, we have a Finnish city, Tampere. Apparently there's very much sunshine there today. So Sanna, bring some sunshine to us and please share your presentation and welcome to this webinar.
Thank you. Just some clicks.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So good, not morning anymore. Nice to see you all. My name is Sanna Ovaska and I work as a project manager at City of Tampere in Finland in the Department of Traffic System Planning. And it's always nice to be with Nordic friends get together, and it's nice to see that there are so many people joining from different cities. So my topic today is social sustainability in tough climate policy, and especially I will be talking from mobility or traffic perspective, because I'm myself working with those issues. So I will shortly introduce our city's targets we have for mobility, especially the target related to social sustainability. And after that, I will tell some ongoing or future measures or actions that are related to this topic or target. Very short Tampere info for those who don't know the city before. So I represent smaller city compared to previous presentations. Tampere has about 250,000 residents living here, and the city is growing very fast. It's after year, it's a favorite city of Finns, so we have quite a good boost or buff around this around our city, which is really nice. And we can also say that we are kind of forerunner what comes to sustainable mobility. We got 2 years ago, we got a SUMP, Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan Award, and it was for good reason, especially on that year, because that year the tram traffic started in Tampere on 2 first lines, and now we have a construction going on for the next ones, and we are also planning to a regional tram network. And what comes to mobility, there is also, of course, a regional bus network, and the first local commuter train stop also started working some 1 or 2 years ago. And plus that, of course, new cycling possibilities and e-scooters and so on. But about our targets, like almost every European city, Tampere has a roadmap for climate neutrality, which is really the important target we all have. Beside that, we have as I mentioned, that we got the award. We have a sustainable urban mobility plan, SUMP or SUMP, and it includes a broader sustainability viewpoint, but concentrates on mobility, not all emission sectors. And in this slide, you can see, and this is from our SUMP, you can see 6 target teams we have, and those are carbon neutral, efficient, equal, safe, active, and environmentally responsible. Behind, of course, you can and you can guess, the challenges that are behind these targets. And of course, these are not separated from each other; they go hand in hand. But what is very typical for SUMP, that they are very human-centered, and the better quality of life is central. And as a topic today, social sustainability, I will represent equality target. Yeah, so what does it mean, equality in mobility, and why we should be interested in it? I think the central question is for whom we are building the city or new mobility options. Do we actually know that for whom we are building it or offering the new solutions, and how we could make it visible, for example, for politicians? And how could we know that better? And if needed, how could we change the current situation if we are not happy with that? So with every plan and or mobility decision, it's important to recognize whose mobility is going to be improved and who's not, and also who might be harmed with possible negative effects. That's very important to know. And additionally, how could we narrow the unwanted mobility and welfare differences with sustainable mobility possibilities? So what is also related to this topic is that climate actions we are making need to be fair and need to be also socially sustainable, and we need to be able to show it and make it visible. We want to prevent mobility poverty and of course make car-free lifestyle or possibilities much easier than they are today. And of course, they are getting better and better every year and day. And this is, of course, also accessibility question, because we have it depends how to calculate it, but we have something like 10 to 35,000 residents that have permanent constraints for mobility, and of course the group is growing when people are getting older, so it's not any that's also important issue. And of course this equality target is very much connected with safety and what's under that target. For example, how we can provide safe and independent mobility for kids and all kind of people, but for example for kids. And I would say that we are in Tampere and might be a bit similar situation elsewhere. We are not that used to learn this kind of human side of traffic planning, and of course we are working more and more on that. So with my presentation, I also want to say that we are kind of in the beginning of this. We have done good work, but there's still a lot to do, and it's, I know I have and our city have learned from your cities that are present today, and will learn for sure, because quite often Scandinavian cities on European level are forerunners with this kind of issues. But it's important to recognize the present mobility differences. It's the starting point to make them visible. And of course, there are differences what comes to age and neighborhood you are living, your income, housing type, gender, of course, employment status, disabilities, and many issues. There are some examples very typical, like men drive more cars, and women take more often public transport, or kids take more often bike or scooter. Or if you have an immigrant background, you might meet some difficulties, and also your working markets are different, and it can cause, for example, so-called forced car ownership. So you need to have a car even though you really can't afford it. But of course, this is very complex topic. Differences are not always like signs of inequality, because of course our needs and life situations are different. But yeah, it's I think it's a starting points to make the differences visible. So we want to prevent mobility poverty, or if you want to put it other way, increase social sustainability in mobility. And what does it mean? It means that life is easier, or possibilities are easier to reach without own a car, and moving without your own car should be possible with a reasonable price, effort, and time. So there always needs to be these three factors. And in these pictures, you can see how we have written it down. So there needs to be supply, accessibility, affordability, time, and suitability. So when all these are working, the mobility works. And of course, this is not only question of city planning or mobility planning. It's very much a question of service network planning, for example. Yeah, maybe that's all I have for this. So some actions I want to mention before the time is I have used my time. The first we are working very much is developing the assessment for human related impacts. That's the important thing, how to make when we have a new plan, or it's a new decision, or when we want to assess the impacts later on, not only before but later. It's how we can find the human related impacts. That's what we are doing. And what is related to this is that how we can reach different people, how we can interact and do more two-way planning with different people. That's very crucial. And of course, what is common with all 6 targets I showed earlier is that resources need to be more resources for sustainable modes of transport. And not only resources, it's space also. Because same actions, they are not separated. Same actions work with every target we have. There are, of course, balanced differences, but the direction is same, which is, of course, important. Then I heard also in previous about e-scooters. Stockholm mentioned it. That's also topic we are working, because problems we have with e-scooters. The problems are more or are worse for some groups of people, and that's a topic we want to work on. And it's same with winter maintenance. It's very crucial for some people, and how we could make it better. And of course, the important is that with every plan and decision, we take this target in consideration. But these were some examples. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sanna, for that presentation. Very enlightening as well. I think we have now had several good presentations that will lay the foundation for our workshop, and I hope you will join us for it. I will briefly show you the questions that we would like to ask in a workshop. Let me just see that I now share the right presentation. So what we want to do in this workshop, we want you to discuss 3 topics. I've assigned some rooms for you. We want to talk about what is the most important factor to reach the goal of net zero emissions in the transport sector before 2030. You have the presentations in your head, and you have the experience as well from your side to sit and discuss, and I hope you join us for discussing that. And the second question, what is the greatest obstacle to reach the goal of becoming net zero emission in the transport sector? So also focusing of the kind of the barriers, what we need to overcome in order to reach the goals. And what are the bigger benefits and of cooperation between the Nordic cities? I think there are some obvious answers here, but maybe there are some also other answers that we need to look at. And ITS will play a significant role as an agent for optimizing and integrating the transport and mobility chain. So I want you to think about the Nordic aspect of this and how we can together create an innovation room for more innovation, new inventions, and also industrialization, because this is also important for our industry partners and private companies that are also here in this webinar, that we kind of set an example and an area for that. What we'll do now is have a technical break. I think some of you would like to have fill up your coffee cups, etc. And what we do is it's 5 minutes. I think that should give you time. And if we meet here back 1:45, I will assign you to your rooms, and we'll have a half-an-hour workshop, and then we join back, do a short discussion from the room owners, and then some action points of what we do to move forward. So let's meet in 5 minutes. Thank you. I'll stop the recording during that time.